So, the first broadly agreed upon city and state in Mesoamerica was Monte Alban in Oaxaca. And we talked a little bit about how Monte Alban was related to the earlier site of San Jose Mogote. We'll return to that again today. But we're also going to talk about how Monte Alban really demonstrates the important relationship between sacrifice and the establishment of Mesoamerican states. And then I'll lay out for you some details of kind of the architecture of downtown Monte Alban. So to get started, human sacrifice seems to have been important in the establishment of Monte Alban from its kind of precursor at San Jose Mogote. Human sacrifice in Mesoamerica seems to have been primarily practiced by nobles and on nobles. Warfare was often between nobles, and so if you went to war and captured a noble from an enemy community, they would provide the most sacred, powerful blood for you to give in an offering. This is an interesting difference, in my opinion, between how Mesoamericans fought their wars and how we practice warfare in our society. And then this is important as well. When those enemy nobles were captured, they were sacrificed, if at all possible, it appears, as part of dramatic public ceremonies. A big aspect of this was public display, was spectacle, was showing the commoners of your community your power, showing them the special offering you were making on their behalf of human sacrifice. So this was a ritual act that took place in public settings, and commoners would sort of observe as the nobles partook in this activity. So here we are in the highlands of southern Mexico, in the valley of Oaxaca, with the site of Monte Alban at the center of that three-armed valley of Oaxaca. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Monte Alban seems to have grown out of the kind of seed planted at the middle formative and even early formative community of San Jose Mogote that rose to power by the middle formative period and the most important site in the valley of Oaxaca, but then went through some kind of political crisis near the end of the middle formative period, as demonstrated by San Jose Mogote Monument 3 here, that shows not only early writing, but probably one of the first clear pieces of iconographic evidence for sacrifice in Mesoamerica. So this political crisis occurred at San Jose Mogote. There's evidence of buildings being burned. There's evidence of conflict. There's some evidence here of sacrificing some important named person. And then shortly after this, the population at San Jose Mogote decreases significantly, and it appears that, based on similarity in artistic style, for example, it appears that the powerful families at San Jose Mogote actually moved to the nearby mountaintop and established the new site of Monte Alban in what would have been a defensible location at the top of this mountain. So if we look at Monte Alban with some aerial imagery, we can see that this is a large hilltop or mountaintop area. You can see that everything in that sort of darker green triangle is part of the site. In fact, the site extends beyond that. There are terraces and architectural evidence all across the top of this mountain and down to the edges of the mountain and so forth. But the area that's cleared off in the middle, which you can see in this zoomed in area, this main plaza is just a small fraction of the large site of Monte Alban. And yet most of everything I'm going to show you in the subsequent images is just from this small area of the main plaza that's been cleared of foliage. So here we are looking at the main plaza. Now this is during the rainy season when everything is quite green. Oaxaca goes through a monsoonal system of rainfall, so it also turns very dry at certain times of the year. But you can see from these people for scale that the main plaza at Monte Alban is huge. So keep in mind that this is just that small cleared area at the center of the site. So this is a massive site. In fact, it was during the late formative, shortly within a few centuries of its forming, it was a 400-hectare site, which is 800 football fields roughly in size, and probably 15,000 people. by that late formative period. So this was a major urban settlement. This couldn't have just been the people from the smaller town of San Jose Mogote. There's a population nucleation going on here where people are moving in from other areas of the highlands of Oaxaca, from around the valley of Oaxaca, and sort of consolidating themselves into an urban settlement at this protected mountaintop site. Now, a couple of other things to notice. There's a lot of monumental architecture here, big buildings, pyramids, platforms, but the largest accomplishment of human labor that you're looking at in this image is actually the flattening and the leveling out of the plaza itself. In order to make this site, the commoners had to, probably under the direction of basically urban planners, of the elite organizers of that labor, they had to flatten the top of this mountain, filling in certain spots, cutting down others, in order to build this impressive site. Now, another thing to notice is this is not a logical place to have a community if you're going to be an agricultural society. This isn't down in the valley bottom. This isn't near a source of water. In fact, there's practically no fresh water up here unless you're collecting rainwater. So resources, food, water, other materials, all had to be brought by the commoners up to the top of the mountain. So they're really emphasizing being in a protected, defensible location, probably because of conflict. So Monte Alban was formed near the end of the middle formative period. That's when it was established. And by the late formative period, it was truly a city and state capital. And the general consensus is that this is the first city and state in Mesoamerica. It was at the peak of a four-tiered site hierarchy, so there were three kind of smaller classes of site sizes beneath it. There's evidence of rising inequality. So you can see, for example, here we have this two-room temple. There are examples of noble tombs under some of these temples, and there are elite homes, kind of palaces all around the central plaza that demonstrate that certain people who could live near the plaza were powerful. Another centrally located architectural structure at Monte Alban is this main plaza ball court. It's right off the edge of the main plaza, and this is really significant. As I've mentioned several times, the ball game, or really ball games plural, in Mesoamerica was not and is not just a pastime. It's an important aspect of politics. It's an important aspect of religion, and in my opinion, the architecture of Monte Alban really demonstrates that. Some of the noble palaces located near the central plaza at Monte Alban demonstrate the rising social inequality of the late formative and early classic period in this part of Mesoamerica. You can see here, for example, that this structure has been built with massive stone lintels above the door that would have been difficult to move in here, that required communal labor in order to do this. It would have been a lot easier to do this with smaller stones, but they have this large kind of lintel piece here. And then in some of the tombs beneath the floors of these palaces, there are actually tombs that depict the royal or noble personages who were buried there. So this is actually from a different site of Lambityeco, but it gives a good example of an elite tomb of probably a married couple, a founding couple, with actually portraits of the buried individuals themselves. Now, in some cases, in these noble tombs, the excavators might find skeletons of human remains, but in other cases, it appears that cremation was an important practice among the Zapotec nobles. So these urns, in some cases found in the tombs, actually contained cremains or cremated human remains. And then, as I mentioned, it appears that human sacrifice was a really important aspect of the establishment of Monte Alban. So this is called a danzante stone, and if you notice, it's similar in its artistic style to Monument 3 from San Jose Mogote. Just as I mentioned, artistic style is one of the pieces of evidence for the connection between these sites. Now, danzante means dancer in Spanish. It was initially thought, when archaeologists and art historians first looked at these, It was thought they might be dancers or swimmers, or it wasn't sure what was going on. We now think that many of them probably depict people who are being sacrificed. There might be others that depict people in a trance state who maybe are practicing auto-sacrifice, like that example I showed you from the Maya region. But some of the evidence we can see for sacrifice here include the closed eye, the open mouth, and aside from a large ear spool and a necklace and maybe some kind of piece of headgear or something, this person is mostly nude. Remember, being a noble person means wearing your social status. So to have that stripped away from you is kind of a shaming experience. Also, many of these characters depicted in the danzantes are in contorted, twisted, painful-looking body positions, which is why they were originally thought of as potentially dancers. Now, most of these danzante stones were found in the lower left portion of this map here. So this is a plan map of the main plaza at Monte Alban. And if you look where Building M and Building L are, in that lower southern section of the main plaza is where most of the danzante stones have been discovered. Now that's important. I will point out to you again later. The northern versus southern portions of this site appear to have different symbolic meanings. So here we can see in this image that I took from partway up the southern platform at the main plaza at Monte Alban. Below Building L, near Building M, is what is called the Danzante Gallery, where there are some of the over 300 danzantes that have been discovered at Monte Alban. Here's an older image of the gallery showing a lineup of these danzantes that were found here. Now this is interesting because it appears as though the danzantes, probably like the Olmec colossal heads, were actually carved somewhere else and were moved around. That's important because it means we don't know where they originally were used. We don't know if they were moved around like chess pieces or if they rather were mostly at this end of the site. So keep that in mind. Here's an example of a danzante that is a little bit more complex and perhaps a little bit later, more recent than the other one I showed you. It's got different written glyphs down the chest of the individual, and then if you look between this individual's legs, that appears to be a blood glyph that might indicate either that this person has been captured and has been castrated, or perhaps that they've practiced some auto-sacrifice. It's been recorded that some of the auto-sacrifice in Mesoamerica had to do with letting blood from one's own penis. So that may be what's going on here. It appears to me that this person isn't having a good day. If you look at the position of the hands and the feet, this is a contorted, kind of painful-looking situation. But the person is still wearing their ear spool, still wearing their elaborate, maybe some headgear or hairstyle. So it's not entirely clear if this person has been sacrificed or maybe is practicing auto-sacrifice. Here's some examples of danzantes. You've seen the one on the right, but the other two are new to you. They appear to be a simpler style, perhaps some of the earlier examples of danzantes. They're actually under a covered area. Some of the danzantes now have been moved inside the museum at Monte Alban because they're eroding in the acid rain. So in some cases they've actually been replaced out on the site itself by cement casts. But those still give you a good impression of what the originals looked like, and you can go visit the originals in the museum. So here we have some just examples of different monuments showing decapitated heads and the blood glyph. One appearing to show maybe a priest holding what might be like a small jaguar head, but also covered in blood glyphs. So it's unclear, has this person practiced auto-sacrifice, or is this person a priest who practices the sacrifice of others? But clearly, blood and blood glyphs and sacrifice are really important in the sort of lexicon of imagery at Monte Alban. Here we have what might be a sacrificial victim at Monte Alban. I think the beard is interesting. Note the beard there and the hairstyle or some kind of headgear, and the contorted, painful body position, and then what appears to be a blood glyph or possibly even evidence of disemboweling that appears to be coming out of his stomach there. But my own advisor from grad school has argued that some of these carvings may not be people dying from sacrifice, but rather people who are maybe practicing a ritual where they are doing auto-sacrifice. Maybe they're using hallucinogens, and so they're in some kind of a trance state. Certainly, with 300 of these and a variation between them, there is room for multiple interpretations. So here we are looking at the main plaza at Monte Alban from the southern end of it again. And this is Building J right in front of you in the foreground. Building J is really the only building at the site that's not kind of square in its shape. It's shaped more like an arrow, and it's pointing in a weird direction, probably as a statement of astronomical significance. In fact, the whole layout of Monte Alban is carefully measured, carefully oriented north-south. Things are carefully laid out, and things are consistent in their size and shape. There was a lot of planning that went into this, and we'll see this again at Teotihuacan with maybe even more extreme examples. Now, if you go to Monte Alban today, which I hope you have the chance to do as a tourist, and you walk around Building J, if you look at the wall of Building J on the outside, it's actually had these stones, similar to the danzantes, but a little different, brought from somewhere else, recycled perhaps, and set into the wall. Now here's an example of one of these stones set into the wall at Building J. These have been called the conquest slabs, and what they appear to show is a hill glyph similar to the glyphs I showed you for the Mixtec codices, and then underneath it, an upside-down human head. That's been interpreted as some kind of a statement of deposing a ruler, or maybe literally decapitating a ruler. Now there's a bunch of these, and archaeologists like Kent Flannery and Joyce Marcus have argued that these indicate that the nobles establishing Monte Alban were going out and conquering other communities and then bragging about it back at Monte Alban. They have been interpreted alongside the danzante stones as saying, you know, these rulers were brought back to Monte Alban. They were sacrificed, probably in front of a big crowd of commoners in the central plaza. And this huge statement of power and conquest and sacrifice and kind of the ritual sort of sacred covenant that we talked about in that last lecture, all of this played into the establishment of the growing power of Monte Alban. Now, this is a hypothesis. It's not proven beyond the shadow of a doubt, but this is kind of the model that's been proposed. Here's a drawing of the carved stone that I just showed you, the conquest slab, so you can see it a little bit more clearly with the hill glyph, the upside down head, and what appears to be a date. Now, I believe it's significant that the danzante carvings and the conquest slabs, which are part of Building J in the foreground of this photo, are both tend to be found at the southern end of the main plaza at Monte Alban. It is worth mentioning again that it's possible those stones were moved around. We aren't sure where they originally were used, but at least by the later occupation of Monte Alban, those references to sacrifice and conquest were all located toward the lower end, the southern end of the site. So if we look at an image of the site from plan view, we can see that Building J in the lower center, and then the Building M and Building L area of the danzantes there in the lower part of the site is all located near the southern platform. Now, I suggest that this is because the site itself of Monte Alban is a cosmogram, or sort of a map of the universe. The northern end of the site is the celestial realm, related to kind of the ethereal heavens and the sky and so forth. There's sky imagery there. And the southern end of the site is related to death and sacrifice and conquest, the watery underworld that people travel into when they die in Mesoamerican belief. So one piece of evidence for this is the Vibron frieze, which is similar to some of the art that we'll see later at Teotihuacan. This found up at the northern end of the site. So both Monte Alban and Teotihuacan, and possibly even that earlier Olmec site of La Venta that I showed you earlier in the class, are all sort of maps on the landscape of the Mesoamerican idea of the universe. Some other key things about Monte Alban include high status houses located up in the northern end of the site. So if the southern end of the site is for sacrifice and so forth, the northern end of the site or of the main plaza was where people more frequently had their their noble houses. There's more artistic imagery of the lightning god, the storm god Cosijo, located near the northern end of the site. In fact, there are other areas nearby. There's the site of Atzompa, which is actually sort of a suburb of Monte Alban. Also, noble houses up there. That's all located on the northern side of the Great Plaza. So we've talked a little bit about the sort of ideological factors involved in the sacrifice and the site as a cosmogram. But there are also some practical considerations. Monte Alban was a defensible location. It hasn't all been exposed or reconstructed because the parts of the site that have been most reconstructed are those that the tourists want to pay money to go see. So other parts haven't been, but there's a defensive wall built around the main plaza at Monte Alban. There are other spots on the southern platform showing rulers, capturing victims and so forth. But also what's significant about this slide is that Monte Alban, the Zapotec people at Monte Alban, had writing. They had their own script. And Monte Alban, located in the Central Valleys that you can see on this map in the kind of teal color, is just one of the powerful sites. It's the largest, but it's just one of the powerful sites of the late formative and classic period in Oaxaca. In fact, Oaxaca is a very diverse place. The modern government recognizes 16 different ethno-linguistic groups in Oaxaca, all these different regions of language and tradition and ethnicity in Oaxaca. And some of the other sites in ancient Oaxaca built during the late and terminal formative period might have been competing centers, and even potentially the very places from which some of those sacrificial victims were taken, places that might have been in conflict with Monte Alban, even at certain times been conquered in some places. So some of these include in the Mixteca Alta or the Mixtec Highlands, Yucuita, Huamelulpan, Montenegro, Cerro Jazmin, and Cerro de las Minas. So here we see on the left a carved stone from Cerro de las Minas, which would have been a Mixtec site, and so they had their own brand of writing, but it was actually a different tradition. Here we see an overview of Huamelulpan. Huamelulpan hasn't been as reconstructed as Monte Alban. It's not as much of a tourist attraction, but it was another important late formative site of a different ethnic group, the Mixtecs. It was at Huamelulpan, I pointed out to you in our last lecture, where they found the altar of the human skulls. And here, another site, the hilltop center of Montenegro, also in the Mixteca Alta region. And then in the border areas between territory that would have belonged to the Zapotecs and other groups such as the Mixtec and Triqui and Amusco and other Oaxacan groups, it's possible, this is still debated, but it's possible that a large collection of human skulls found buried near the surface may represent a skull rack, which the Aztecs would later use skull racks in central Mexico and call them tzompantli, and the Spanish actually recorded the use of these when they arrived by the Aztecs. Oaxaca is a vibrant living place. Monte Alban is a vibrant tourist attraction. Lots of people still go there. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's very much a modern place that is still affected by what's going on in Mexico. So just a couple of years ago, when there was a really powerful earthquake in central Mexico, there was some damage to Monte Alban that has been the focus of some reconstruction work. I think just this picture I think I took in 2018 or 2019, some reconstruction going on there. And then just a little plug for our program. This is me on the left with some of our, I've got one of our grad students there, and then some a friend of mine from grad school and a couple of other grad students I interacted with or did some publications with. And we all went together on a tour of Monte Alban. So this was an opportunity that one of our master students had to interact with a broader community of scholars and get a chance to do some lab work in Oaxaca. Julian Acuna, third from the left there, was my grad student a couple of years ago, and he was able to study some obsidian stone tools from my research in coastal Oaxaca. And in order to do that study, we went and spent a good part of the summer in Oaxaca and had a chance to visit Monte Alban.